1985. Embu das Artes, Brazil. Shovels cut into the red earth. A forensic team unearths a skeleton from a common grave. The name on the headstone reads Wolfgang Gerhardt. But investigators believe these remains belong to Josef Mengele, the angel of death. For 40 years, the world hunted the man who turned medical science into systematic torture. Survivors remember his face. He stood on the selection ramps at Auschwitz, whistling a casual tune. One flick of his hand sent thousands to the gas chambers. He was obsessed with twins. He performed surgeries without anesthesia and injected dye into children's eyes. How did the most wanted criminal on the planet hide in Brazil for decades? It wasn't just luck. He had a network. He had protectors. He had false identities that kept him invisible while Mossad searched every corner of the globe. Why did the trail lead to this specific grave? At first glance, a simple drowning accident, but in reality, the end of a long, calculated deception. The forensic team needed to know the truth. They pulled the wooden lid from the dirt. The footage shows white bone fragments and a skull resting on the soil. The camera records, experts measuring the jawline and checking dental records against Nazi files. There was no mistake. Events accelerated. The skull was flown to experts for reconstruction. They compared every fracture and every tooth to medical records from the 1940s. The world waited for the result. The tension was visible. Why did he die as Wolfgang Gerhardt? The real Gerhardt had returned to Austria years earlier, leaving his documents behind for the fugitive. Mengele took the name and lived a quiet, paranoid life. He walked the streets of Sao Paulo. He visited neighbors. No one suspected the monster in their midst. The forensic report was final. The measurements matched perfectly. The man in the red earth was indeed the doctor from Auschwitz. Thus ended the hunt. The bodies were removed at night. The story cut off here. May 30th, 1943. This date marks the official arrival of Josef Mengele at the Auschwitz-Birkenau extermination camp. Administrative SS records held at the Auschwitz State Museum confirm his entry into the complex. He did not arrive as a common soldier. He was a doctor with degrees from the University of Munich. He held doctorates in both physical anthropology and medicine. He represented the Nazi academic elite. The gates of Auschwitz-Birkenau stood in occupied Poland. A train whistle blows in the distance. The metallic sound echoes through the fog covering the camp. Then, the heavy wooden doors of the cattle cars slam open. Hundreds of Hungarian Jews stumble out. They are exhausted and disoriented. Many do not know their location. Guards push them toward the selection ramp. Among the SS officers, one man stands out. His uniform is perfectly pressed. His boots are polished to a mirror shine. He wears white gloves. His posture is stiff and ceremonial. This was Josef Mengele. He took his post with an authority that went beyond his rank. To the prisoners, he appeared cold and professional. To the survivors, he would become something much more sinister. How did he decide who lived? The answer was a simple gesture of the hand. Testimonies from the Nuremberg trials describe his behavior. Mengele treated the selection ramp like a stage. He moved his arm with theatrical elegance. He used his thumb to point, left or right. One direction meant immediate death in the gas chambers. The other meant slow death through slave labor. The footage from the era shows his face remained calm during this process, but the selections were only the beginning. Behind the administrative duties lay a dark obsession. Captured medical records later revealed his true focus. He wanted twins. He searched the crowds for children who looked identical. Eva Moses Kor arrived at Auschwitz at the age of 10. She was not alone. She stood with her twin sister on the crowded ramp. Guards scanned the rows of people, shouting for twins to step forward. For Mengele, these children were not humans. They were research subjects. The camp was silent during these selections. Only the sound of barking dogs and shouting guards broke the air. Mengele watched every movement. He waited for the next set of twins to appear. His work was just starting. There was no turning back. 1944. Josef Mengele stood before the new arrivals at Auschwitz. He did not see people. He saw laboratory specimens. The survivors remember his words clearly. He told the children they had two fathers now, their biological parents and him. He called himself Father Mengele. How did a doctor become a butcher? Medicine usually saves lives, but in Auschwitz, it became a tool for genocide. Mengele used children to prove racial theories that had no basis in reality. Records from the camp provide the scale. Mengele experimented on approximately 1,500 pairs of twins. Only 200 survived. The rest were used until they broke. The procedures were precise and brutal. The footage would have shown rows of children strapped to tables. Mengele injected chemicals directly into their eyeballs. He wanted to change their color to blue. He performed amputations on healthy limbs. He conducted blood transfusions between twins with incompatible blood types. He deliberately infected subjects with typhus and tuberculosis. Every incision and every stitch happened without anesthesia. It was not surgery, it was torture. Dr. Miklos Niezli saw it all. He was a Jewish prisoner and a pathologist forced to work as Mengele's assistant. In 1946, he published his memoirs. He described the dissection of living twins. Mengele wanted to examine internal organs while they were still functioning. He kept the organs in glass jars filled with formaldehyde. Each jar had a neat academic label. The horror was in the silence. Niezli reported that Mengele never shouted. He never looked angry. He moved with absolute calm. He hummed classical tunes while cutting into skin. But the end was approaching. January 1945. The ground shook. The sound of Soviet heavy artillery grew louder every hour. The Red Army was closing in on Auschwitz-Birkenau. Mengele realized the Third Reich was collapsing. He did not wait for the liberation. The evacuation began. The camera would show black smoke rising from the chimneys, but it wasn't the crematoriums this time. Mengele was burning his archives. He threw years of medical reports into the flames. He shredded personal documents. He gathered his notes on twins and packed them into a crate. He stripped off his SS uniform and put on the clothes of a regular German soldier. He walked out of the camp gates and disappeared into the chaos of the retreating army. He left behind thousands of corpses and a few starving survivors. The hunt for the angel of death had begun. He headed toward the border. There was no hesitation. His goal was South America. Thus began one of the longest escapes in history. June 1945. Allied military records confirm that Josef Mengele began his disappearance by wearing the standard uniform of a Wehrmacht soldier. He carried no officer insignia. American troops captured him and held him in a prisoner of war camp for several weeks. He ate their rations and slept on the cold ground among thousands of other defeated men. Why did the Americans let the angel of death walk free? It was a failure of administration. At that time, Allied intelligence had not yet finished the master list of wanted war criminals. More importantly, Mengele lacked the mandatory SS blood group tattoo under his left arm. He had refused the ink out of vanity. Without that mark, he looked like any other conscript. The guards opened the gates. Mengele walked out. For the next 4 years, he worked as a simple farmhand in Bavaria. He shoveled manure and tended to crops on a farm near Günzburg. German Federal Archive documents reveal a stunning fact. He lived under his real name. He did not hide in a cellar. He did not use a mask. This was a gamble based on arrogance. It worked because the initial hunt for Nazis was disorganized and chaotic. But this period of calm ended in 1949. The Nuremberg trials were now in full swing. Survivors were testifying. The world began to hear the specific details of the medical atrocities at Auschwitz. Mengele's name appeared in the transcripts. He realized the farm in Bavaria was no longer a sanctuary. He needed to leave the continent. He turned to the Odessa Network. This was the organization of former SS members. They had already built the rat lines. These were secret escape routes designed to funnel war criminals toward South America. Declassified British intelligence files track his movement toward the border. The process was mechanical. Mengele obtained a Red Cross passport. The document was forged. It carried the name Helmut Gregor. He traveled south through the mountains. The camera records the final steps in Europe. In May 1949, he stood on the docks of Genoa, Italy. He carried a suitcase in his fake papers. He boarded a ship bound for the Atlantic. Buenos Aires was the destination. The city received him without question. The hunt for Mengele had officially failed. 1946, Argentina became a sanctuary for the defeated. Juan Perón held open sympathies for the National Socialist movement and opened the borders to thousands of German fugitives. Official Argentine records provide the details. Josef Mengele did not hide in the shadows of Buenos Aires. He lived openly for an entire decade. After 1956, he even stopped using aliases. He used his real name on official documents and work permits. He found employment in the pharmaceutical industry. Specifically, he worked for companies owned by German immigrants who had settled in the country years prior. The extradition files reveal his daily routine. He frequented German-style cafes in the city center. He attended meetings with other exiled party members. He wrote letters to his family back in Germany through the regular mail. The audacity was absolute. The man at the top of every Nazi hunter's list lived a public life. He walked the streets without a mask. He sat in restaurants without looking over his shoulder. But 1960 changed everything. In May of that year, the Mossad struck. Israeli secret agents snatched Adolf Eichmann off a street in Buenos Aires. They drugged him and smuggled him out of the country on a plane. The operation was a lightning bolt. Every Nazi refugee in Argentina felt the pressure. The illusion of safety vanished instantly. No one knew how Mengele would react to Eichmann's capture. He realized Argentina was no longer a fortress. He needed a new plan. Brazil would become his final hiding place. But the journey was long. 1961. The border between Argentina and Paraguay. The footage would show a wide brown river and dense jungle. Josef Mengele crossed the Paraná River in a small wooden boat. He carried a single suitcase. He sat low in the vessel as the water splashed against the hull. Paraguayan immigration records tell the story. Investigators later found the entry logs. He registered under the name Josef Mengele. It was a minimal change. This small alteration proved one thing. Local authorities were not looking closely, or they simply did not care. He tried to start over. In Paraguay, he attempted to build a life as a farmer. He looked at land and checked equipment, but the quiet life was impossible. Paranoia began to consume him. Every engine sound was a threat. Every stranger was a kidnapper. There was no turning back. 1961 to 1979. The interior of São Paulo, Brazil. Josef Mengele moved through a network of German immigrants. Two families, the Stammers and the Bossarts, provided the shelter. One man organized the logistics. Wolfgang Gerhardt, an Austrian Nazi sympathizer living in Brazil, became his primary protector. How did he remain hidden for so long? The world looked for a monster in a palace, but in reality, he lived in a shack. Brazilian federal police archives opened after 1985. The documents revealed the truth. For nearly 2 decades, Mengele moved between remote farms in the São Paulo countryside. He erased his own name. He took the identity of Wolfgang Gerhardt. The real Gerhardt had returned to Austria, leaving his legal documents behind for the fugitive. The lifestyle was austere. Wolfram Bossart later told police that Mengele lived like a hermit. There were no luxuries. The Bossart family met him in 1971 and kept his secret until the very end. But the isolation took a toll. Mengele suffered from explosive rages. He showed constant signs of paranoia. He looked over his shoulder at every shadow. The police seized his private correspondence. These letters show a man consumed by bitterness. In 1977, he wrote to his son, Rolf. He claimed he had lived more than half his life as a hunted man. He expressed zero remorses. He wrote that he only did what science and his country demanded. Rolf Mengele traveled to Brazil in secret in 1977. The footage of later interviews shows Rolf describing the meeting. He expected a confession. He waited for a sign of guilt. It never came. Mengele remained convinced he was a legitimate scientist performing necessary work. The psychological disconnect was absolute, but the net was tightening. Nazi hunters increased their pace. Simon Wiesenthal, the most famous operative in the field, put Mengele at the top of his list. The search intensified. It was a race against time. 100 kilometers from São Paulo, the town of Embu das Artes. Josef Mengele lived there for years while the world searched for him in the jungles of Bolivia. Why did Brazil fail to find him despite international cooperation? Who protected him? How did his decades of hiding finally end? At first glance, a quiet immigrant, but in reality, the most hunted man on earth. Why did the authorities miss him? Brazil cooperated with war crime investigators on paper, but local networks were deep and silent. The question remains, who else knew he was there? February 7, 1979. Bertioga Beach on the coast of Sao Paulo. The sun was high, the temperature was rising. Josef Mengele was 67 years old. He walked toward the water alongside the Mossad family. The scene is clear, families are swimming, children are playing in the sand. Mengele enters the ocean. Police records from 1985 reconstruct the final minutes. The footage of the files shows typed pages and witness statements. Witnesses say the water was calm. But Mengele began to struggle. His muscles seized, his breathing stopped. The man known as the Angel of Death was drowning in the Atlantic surf. The Mossads dragged his body onto the sand. People gathered around the gray-haired man. No one knew his real name. No one knew his crimes. To the crowd, he was just an old man who had suffered a stroke while swimming. There was no miracle. There was no escape. The police arrived and cordoned off the area. They moved the body to the morgue under a false name. The hunt ended in the sand. An era of silence began. 4:30 in the afternoon. Josef Mengele walked into the ocean alone. He was a capable swimmer, but the current at Bertioga Beach was aggressive. Wolfram Bossert later told the police that the water was heavy that day. While swimming, Mengele suffered a massive stroke. This was the official medical determination made years later. The Bosserts saw him struggling and rushed into the waves. They dragged his unconscious body onto the sand. He was not breathing. There was no pulse. How did they react? At first glance, a medical emergency, but in reality, a frantic cover-up. The Bosserts did not call for an ambulance. They did not seek a lifeguard. They stood over the body and waited. Minutes passed while they debated the risk of exposure. They feared the police would discover Mengele's true identity if a doctor arrived too quickly. By the time they asked for help, it was too late. The original death certificate was a lie. The Sao Paulo Medical Legal Institute registered the deceased as Wolfgang Gerhardt. The document stated he was a 67-year-old Austrian who died from drowning. The body went into the ground on February 10, 1979. He was buried in a basic grave at the Embu das Artes cemetery. For 6 years, the secret held. Josef Mengele was dead, but the world continued to hunt a ghost. International agencies spent millions of dollars chasing leads in the jungle while the target was rotting in a cheap coffin. Why did the Bosserts stay silent? They had many opportunities to speak. In later depositions, they cited fear of retaliation and legal consequences. Lieselot Bossert told investigators they did not want to be accused of harboring a war criminal. They chose silence to protect themselves. But the situation changed in 1985. International pressure on Brazil reached a breaking point. The United States Department of Justice and the Israeli Mossad converged on South America. They shared intelligence and intensified the hunt for Nazi refugees. The Brazilian Federal Police took action. Under the command of Commissioner Romo Tuma, agents began raiding properties linked to the Stammer and Bossert families. They seized documents and interrogated witnesses. The pressure was too high. On May 31, 1985, the Bosserts finally confessed. The hunt for the Angel of Death was over. June 6, 1985. The world watched a small cemetery in Embu das Artes, Brazil. The man everyone hunted was dead, buried for 6 years under the name Wolfgang Gerhardt. But the question remained, was this the most wanted doctor in history, or was it a final elaborate deception to end the global manhunt? How could they prove these bones belonged to the Angel of Death? It seemed impossible, but the legal process began. The exhumation started under the glare of international television cameras. Reporters from every continent crowded the perimeter. A joint forensic team took their positions. This was not a local matter. Experts from the United States, West Germany, and Israel stood alongside the Brazilian authorities. The chief medical examiner of the São Paulo IML directed the team. Officials recorded every movement on film. The sound of shovels hitting the dirt was the only noise in the graveyard. They removed the topsoil layer by layer. Eventually, the tools hit wood. The footage shows the moment they reached the coffin. It was a cheap wooden box, severely deteriorated by years in the earth. The team lifted it out. They opened the lid with surgical precision. Inside lay a complete human skeleton. The bones were intact. The lead examiner noted in his official report that the skeletal preservation was surprisingly good despite the humid tropical climate. There was no room for error. Every bone had to be measured. Every anatomical detail had to be mapped. The scientists worked methodically. They cleaned each fragment and laid them out on white sheets. They looked for specific markers. A fracture here, a dental record there. The tension in the laboratory was visible. One mistake would mean a monster had escaped justice forever. But this was only the beginning. The anatomical analysis was about to reveal a secret. The team focused on the skull and the pelvis. They compared the measurements to old SS records from the 1940s. The data began to align. Experts from 2 different continents cross-referenced the findings in real time. There was no turning back now. The world demanded a definitive answer.